So lately I've been doing a lot of work on 3D modeling of characters. Now, I'm not a graphic artist and I don't have a graphic artist background. I have a programming background. But I really wanted to be able to make my own 3D model and I've been working at it. And if you've been struggling with that too, I can tell you that when I started, I wasn't very good. And what I can tell you is that the more characters you create, the better you get at it, just like anything. And I looked at a lot of pictures, watched other people's videos. There's various different techniques that different people use. A lot of it takes a lot of time. And this video is not going to be me making a 3D model. I will start with a 3D model that I've made. It took me quite a while to do it, and I fumbled around a lot. Again, they're getting better, but I wouldn't say they're great. There's a lot of other people who do a better job at that. What this video is going to do is to take your 3D model and map it to an armature. I did a previous video on creating an armature from scratch. Again, lots of videos out there that do it. I took a little bit more time maybe to explain some things that I think other people don't. And in this video, I'm going to be going through in detail how to map that model to the armature and fix it up so you can do animations with it. I'm not going to go into animations right now. I will be using some animations that I've made as demonstrations of some problems when you map your character to the armature and how to fix those up. I will be following up on some other videos on actually doing some animations. Again, I'm going to dive into a little bit more detail maybe and explain how exactly the mapping works, what it does, and how to fix things. Because when I first did this and followed someone's video and did it for the first time, it all seemed rather magical. Just like a lot of things you do the first time, I followed their steps exactly, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, and I had to do it all over again. And I really had no idea why it didn't work because a lot of the videos I watched didn't explain what it was actually doing. So I had no idea how to fix it. So I'll kind of walk through maybe some of the steps, explain what it's doing, and go through some different options for how to do that mapping and kind of some techniques of how you should be making your character models in order to map correctly and what to do once you map it and things are kind of wonky and you want to fix it up. So why don't we put our programming glasses on, dive into Blender, and do some character mapping. So to start out, what I'm going to do is kind of show a progression over this past year of how I have drawn my characters. From the very first character I've drawn after watching my very first video on Blender and creating a character and animating it, up to the latest character that I've made just in the last couple weeks. So what I did is I took some screen captures of all the Blender files to kind of show that progression. Just to give you an idea that, again, I'm no graphic artist. I'm not going to make great characters, but I can make characters that aren't bad. And again, I think I'm getting better. But this first one in the top left was the very first character I made. Watched a video, and again, body not terrible. It's a very basic. Head is very basic. Then I wanted to make a more robotic looking character, so I just kind of went on my own. Again, a little better. Head is still very basic. Heads, I just had a lot of struggle with the heads, trying to get the heads exactly correct and looking good. Then I made a third character, and this was one that I used in my opening video. If you watched my introduction to Blender channel video, this is the model that I used for what I call the good guys that battle the robots that are landing. I think this is the robot. Can't remember exactly. But after coloring him, it makes a big difference. And really the head looks a lot better because I have the visor on there. And again, coloring the arms and the main body differently and the legs looks pretty good. I was pretty happy with him. He worked in the scene that I was putting together. So then I was probably 6 months later really trying to figure out how to make a better defined head that I wanted rather than the very, very simple polygon looking head. And I watched some videos on using Blender sculpting and starting with more of a high resolution sphere and then kind of manipulating that. And I ended up with Mr. Evil Skullman. He was supposed to look like a friendly boy. Not very friendly boy looking. And again, I think the sculpting, you really have to have artistic abilities, which I really don't. Again, getting better. This is what I kind of started with to get a better look for the head. And I don't know what the deal is with the legs, why he's bow-legged. Getting all those legs correct sometimes can be a challenge too, but the head just did not turn out well at all. So then I watched a couple other videos, and one thing I realized is that several of them build a lot of the faces by hand. They don't start with an object, and what I tried to do is either start with a cube or a sphere, and then just manipulate by pulling and moving around the vertices. And it just didn't work very well. Although this is the boy I ended up with. The head, really fits what I was looking for. And what I did is I started with a cylinder, low poly cylinder, and I built the face by hand, just adding actual vertices and connecting them all through joins and creating faces. And I started with the head, and then I went from the neck, and then I built the body down from the head, which seemed to work better. A lot of videos I watched started with the body and then went up to the head, and I found getting the head right is important. And then the last one was building a robot. And again, this robot head, started with the outline and really built all these faces are built by hand through extruding edges. And again, it took me quite a long time to do it. I watched some videos on how to do it, some pretty good ones. And I was pretty happy with the head. The body still needs work. The coloring of the body looks pretty good. Arms and legs still aren't quite where I want it. I've actually improved the hands a bit. Worked on that. But so this is really my progression of my character objects, and we'll be using this boy today and showing how to take that character that's drawn in Blender and attach it to its armature, getting all set up for animation. So let's shrink him down. Oop. Let's go into Blender, and what we see here in Blender is our boy, and he's really made up of 3 parts. I have the main character. I have his hair is a separate object, you can see up here, and his hat is a separate object. I did that just because I drew them independently in order to get them correct. I'm really not happy with the hair. Hair is tough too. I played around with that a bit. Still need some more work on that, but it can be used as a demonstration of how to map all these onto the armature and fix things up. So we have our armature. And again, this armature is the same one that I made through the previous armature video. And if you're unsure how to make that, you can watch that video. And so a couple things. One, when I select the armature, all right, I can go into object mode, which it is right now. I can go into edit mode, which I can move this around, make things bigger, smaller, present its actual positions of all the armature pieces. And then I can go into pose mode. So if I go into pose mode and select, say, the root, and I'm going to grab Z, and you can see that the armature is working as it should. And in pose mode, you can see the legs are bending, but the character isn't bending, mainly because it has not been mapped to the armature yet. I realize I did not turn on my All right, well, this is my new computer that I had set up, and I don't have my keys showing, but really it's not that important for this video. So what we're going to be doing is looking at how to map this character to this armature. So there's a couple things we need to do. Is first of all, we need to select all the items that we want to map to the armature. And what's important is that the order which we select things. Whenever we're parenting an object to another object, we always select the object that's going to be the parent last. Meaning we always select all the children first, and the last thing we select is going to be what we're going to parent to. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to parent all of the objects to the armature. So the armature is going to be the parent of all our other objects. So we select the boy. We're going to hold down the shift key, select the hair and the hat also, because we want to make all three of these a child. And the last thing we're going to do is hold the shift key and select the armature. And then what we're going to do is we are going to hold Control P, and we are going to set the parent, and it detected that we were parenting to an armature, so it gave us some additional options. The armature deform. How do we want to deform our children as the armature moves? And in this case, I'm going to select automatic weights. We can select empty groups, which I'm going to show in a little later. If we're going to assign it to, say, a robot, in robots, things, he doesn't have skin, right? It's metal, and the metal doesn't bend and warp. And if we do automatic weights, essentially what you're going to do is things are going to kind of stretch as the armature moves. So I'm going to select automatic weights. And so now if I select my armature, go up here, go into pose mode, grab my root node, I'm going to grab in the Z, and now we can see what's happened is our character is now moving with our armature. If we grab this joint and we rotate in the Z-axis, you can see his arm moves. Now you can also see his hair is kind of moving in wonky ways that we really don't want it to, and we're going to fix that up. It's like, why is that happening? Well, it's happening because with automatic weights, Blender tried its best to map all of the vertice points, not vector points, vertice points, and map it to each one of these armature items. And what we can do is we can see how it did that by going back into object mode. And this is what you have to understand. You have to understand what it did in order to understand how to fix it. So we can select the object. I'm going to hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and I have selected to just show all the vertex points. If I select a vertex point, come over here, what we can do is we can view the data for that vertex point. By selecting this item here, and if we select the point and select item, what we see is the data about that vertex point. You can see its position here, and these things down here are the vertex weights, which means it gave this item a weight of 0.9 to the head, which is this armature item, and 0 to the shoulder. So this vertex point is going to move when the head moves, and that's it. So every single one of these points, these vertex points, has a mapping value to the armature. So as the armature moves, the vertexes are moving, thus the whole mesh is moving. That's kind of how it works. Now I can edit each one of these individually, which would be very laborious, so I don't really want to do that. So what they have is they've given me an option of kind of tools to do this automatically. So one way to do it is to do this weight paint. So you notice that when I had my mesh selected, I selected weight paint, and what it's doing is it's showing me dark blue where there's no mapping, and the brighter the color, red, is very strong association, and green is a little, yellow is a little less, green is a little less, blue is none. And you'll see over here on the right hand side is the item that is currently being highlighted. So if I select lower leg, you'll notice that all my coloring changed. So now it's showing all the weights that are mapped to the lower leg. I'm gonna shrink this down a little bit. My monitors are a little taller. I realize that, there we go. That's better. So I can select the upper leg. I can select any one of these. These are all the items in my armature that is the parent. So I can select all of these and see how they're mapped. Now a lot of times I have in the past noticed that the waist typically gives me a problem. In this case it's not. That the waist tends to map to those upper legs. But you can see that's looking pretty good. Just the leg and a little bit of the pelvis there is mapped, and that's good. We go back to object mode and select the hair and go into weight paint. What we're going to do is we're going to hide that hat. You can hide and show any of the objects by clicking the little eye over here in the list of all the objects. So we can see just the hair, and we can see that if I go through and start selecting items like the shoulder, we'll notice that part of the hair got mapped to the left shoulder, which was wrong. And I've done this before, so I know that part of it got mapped to the lower arm. This is really the problem. See this red? That means a lot of this got mapped to the lower arm, which we don't want. So I could use weight paint. So you'll see the weight, I've given a 0 weight and I've given 100% strength, and I can click and I can just drag this around, and it's meant to modify that. You'll see it takes quite a bit of moving because it's meant to not be that sensitive. It's meant to be able to do subtle changes, and this way is kind of problematic if you're trying to do a whole item or a whole object. There's easier ways to do that. So what we're going to do is go into object mode, going to go into edit mode. I'm going to select. You'll notice that when I select one of these vertices, it mapped a lot of this hair to a lot of items, which is not good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click A for all. I'm going to select all of them. And what I can do is I can come over here and I can select an item and I can click this remove. And so by clicking remove, it is going to remove this item as mapping to any of the vertices that I've selected. So I can just come right down here. See, as soon as I hit remove, you'll notice that spine disappeared. So I want the head. I can click assign to make sure that everybody's assigned to the head. I want everybody to be assigned to the head. So you'll notice as soon as I clicked assign, this head appeared with 1. So it gave it 100% weight to the head. So I can click in here. I can see, you'll notice that shoulder, I can remove. See, shoulder disappeared. So I just really come all the way down here, and I'm just going to click on everybody and click remove, 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 remove. And what it's going to do is I want everybody to be gone except the head. I don't think any of the legs were, but just in case. All right. So now all the items, you'll notice as I click on these, just the head appears in this vertex weights. So now what we can do is I'm going to come back to object mode. So one thing to notice when you're doing animations and checking this all out is that what I usually do is go into pose mode. So I have to select the armature, go into pose mode, go into animation, and then what's going to happen is as I click one of the animations, you'll notice that the image here changed to map the first item in my animation. Again, I'm not going to go over animations right now, just on all the mapping. So now when I run the animation, so now his hair is behaving. Before, his hair would have been sloshing all around because it would have been mapped to the incorrect items in my armature. So what I can do is I can look at all my items to make sure that everything's looking good. So this doesn't look bad. You'll notice that what it's doing is it's deforming the shoulder a bit. So we can see here, we can zoom in. We can see the shoulder. See, the shoulder is being deformed because it's mapped to multiple armature pieces. And the legs are kind of bending and stretching a bit. The arms are pumping. We have his hat. So if we go here and unhide his hat, see what we can see, his hat is also misbehaving. See how the bill of his hat got like sucked into his head? Well, that's not good. So let's stop this. So what we notice is that one thing that you got to remember, so if I go back to layout view, he's not back in his T-pose. It's one thing I've got to mention. Whenever you're drawing your character, you should always draw it as a start of a T-pose. The T-pose is an assumed starting point for any character when you start working with it. So the problem is he's in the run pose still, which I don't really want. If I go back to animation and I click this and I go back to T-pose, whatever pose you last left your animation in, that's what is going to be the pose when you go back to layout. So I just reselect that T-pose, go back to layout, and now he's back to where I want. Another thing is that you'll notice that the armature is showing through my character. And if I go over here, you'll see when I have my armature selected, I have several different options here. The little guy under viewport display, you have in front, and I can uncheck that if I don't want to see that armature in front of my character, which I don't really need in order to fix up the hat. So let's select the hat. Let's go back to here. Another thing we can do is just to test if you're not sure what is mapped to what. I can select the shoulder, and if I show select, what it's going to do is it's going to highlight all of the vertices that are currently assigned to the shoulder. And you can see all these guys lit up, so I know that's a problem. So that's why the hat got pulled into his head. I really want the hat, again, assigned just to the head. And when I say head, just to clarify, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this guy again and go in front. What I mean is this right here is the head. This this round part of the mesh is going to be assigned to the head part of the armature. And that's what I want to assign the head part, the hair, and the hat. I'm not associating this mesh with another part of the mesh. I'm associating it with the armature itself. Let's go back to the hat, go into edit mode, and we can see that we can test all these. It doesn't really matter because obviously some part of this was assigned to what it wasn't supposed to. So when I select one of these guys, click A to select all, and I'm going to go and I'm going to make sure to remove all of these guys again. Make sure to assign the head to everybody. Upper arm, lower arm, hand, shoulder. Again, I could kind of guess and do this and then check it out. When I've done that in the past, I find that it's just easier to do all of them just to make absolutely sure. All right, all those guys have been fixed. Let's go back, select the armature, reselect the armature, go into pose mode, go into animation, select my run animation again. Yep, and now my hat looks like it's behaving. If I didn't change this to pose mode, this part of my screen just wouldn't change. It doesn't, you don't have to be in pose mode. I can select this back to object mode. And that also works. I usually go into pose mode just in case. Really, the reason I go into pose mode is as I'm looking at this in the animation, I may want to modify part of my animation. I guess that's why I always go into pose mode, because if I see a problem, like when I look at this animation, you know, his feet kind of really snap up into place. And I'm not sure that I like that. It's not really natural. Your feet just don't do that. So as I'm looking at it in the animation, again, I'm talking about animations right now, but you can fix up the animation as you're looking at it. So I kind of do everything at once. I can kind of rotate around. I can look at it. Everything's looking pretty good. Well, actually, part of his shirt. So this white part is the shirt. Notice how it's deforming and it's kind of, his stomach is poking through his shirt. And a little part of his belt buckle. Look at that. Little part of his belt buckle. See how it's not It's kind of being pulled down. You wouldn't really notice that. There's just a lot of little details that you can go through and fix up. But you know how to fix it up. I can go in, I can select any one of those actual vertices and modify each one by hand if I really want to. All right, so what I'm going to do now is show how to map my robot, which I'm going to map in a little different manner than I mapped the boy, because again, my robot doesn't deform, and so I'm going to use a different technique when assigning that robot and kind of showing some other issues when you work with maybe a model that is not going to deform, and possibly how to handle some of those situations. All right, so now we're going to go through an example that's a little bit different. So here I have a robot that I've drawn. So my robot character is made of metal, and of course metal doesn't bend like skin would on my boy. So when I assign the character to my armature, I want to do it a little bit differently. What I want to do is I want to assign all the pieces individually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into object mode, going to select my character body, select my head because he's a separate object, select my armature last, of course, hit Control P, and now instead of selecting with automatic weights, I'm going to select with empty groups. And what this does is it parents it, but it's not going to assign any of the vertices on any of my character to any of my armature pieces. So what I have to do is I have to do those individually. So if I select this and go into object mode, you have to make sure that you've drawn your character specifically so you can easily select all the items that you want to assign to an individual armature piece. And so what I've done is I've done that. And what I've done is I've drawn all these as separate meshes. I'll show you how I did that in a minute. I do go over this more in detail in one of my other Blender tip videos if you want to watch that. But I will go through a quick demo of how to create different meshes within one object. So since this is all one individual mesh, I just select one of the faces. Let's turn our screencast keys on. I did install that. So we can see what I do. Okay, select this, select L, and that's going to select all the items, the linked items in my mesh by default. And then what I can do is I can come over here to my vertex group. So this shows all of the named armature pieces. And I can select upper arm L and assign that. Can select the lower arm, hit L, lower arm, assign that. Let's zoom out a bit. Let's grab his hand, assign that hand L. Now this is mirrored. As you can see, only half of him highlights when I selected him. And the nice thing about this is that since we drew the armature and name things with this .L and .R, when I assign everything on the left side, it automatically is going to assign on the right side. We can kind of see this if I go into top view. I'm going to go back to object mode, select the armature, go into pose mode. Let's select this guy, let's rotate him. You can see his arms rotating exactly how it should. Hand rotates. And now if I do this side, you'll see this also is rotating. So these were assigned at the same time as assigning my other pieces. Now if it doesn't have a .L or .R, like the spine, so when I select, go back, select this guy, tab in, select L, all of this piece I am going to assign to this upper spine part. So if we can see, the spines do not have .L or .R, and the head and the root don't either, because they're down the center. They don't have a mirrored counterpart. Assign. So I go through, I do all the legs and all the feet. I'm going to do is I'm going to go back. You'll notice that the armature now does not match because I'm not in pose mode. So what I need to do is I need to go back and reset this guy back to his normal T-pose. Oop, and I've actually changed the T-pose is the problem. See, actually, if I'm in, you'll notice that in this armature, in this, and I know I haven't gone through the animation, but it actually added a frame to my T-pose, and it made my T-pose actually move his arms. So I'm going to actually highlight these and delete those. Oops. Need to select everything because all of his arms and everything got changed. So there we go. So now he's back to the T-pose. I will be doing other videos on the animations. But for now, we're just going to go back to the layout because what I want to do is kind of show you how to draw your character properly to make sure that you can easily select those meshes. So we'll go into Edit. I'm going to delete this just for demonstration purposes. So what a lot of times people do is you draw the upper arm and then you're going to grab one of the faces. I'm going to do Shift D to duplicate that. I'm going to go into wireframe mode just to kind of see that I'm going to grab along the x-axis and actually push it into that arm. And now I'm going to extrude it outside the arm. Let's go back to solid mode. So now part of this is embedded in that other arm. So now I can extrude like normal, scale, and do whatever I want to do in order to draw that arm. Let's just undo all that. All right, and in that way, because I separated that and created it as a new mesh, I can easily select using that L key, and obviously it makes it go very quick to assign all my pieces to my armature. So what I'm going to do lastly is just show really quickly. This is everything assigned correctly, and I have a run animation here, and what I'm going to do is show I have a punch animation. And it'll kind of highlight some of the problems, and you don't really realize the problems until you try to do some of the animation moves, is that you can see his arm has actually come disconnected because this part is only so long, and I rotated the shoulder forward, but I didn't assign anything up here to the shoulder. I'd almost have to draw a different part of his upper body, attach it to this shoulder armature, in order to move that, to keep that guy connected, because there's a big gap there. Now, whether you see that or not from the back, if this was how I was looking at it in my game, I wouldn't even be able to see that gap. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But you don't really know that until you try to actually do some of your animations and you realize that maybe you messed up. And if you have to do a major reconstruction, you just have to assign everything again. The more you do it, the faster you get at it. And really, this is all about trial and error. I mean, there's no way around it. How I would draw this to actually fix this, I'm not really sure. These shoulder pieces also, they could probably be separate to try to keep those arms attached better. But it's just hard if you really change the armature a lot on something like a robot. This arm doesn't look bad. You know, you run into these problems. I mean, I could extend that all the way in there. I could actually assign it so it would bend. It might not look bad that way. But that's up to you. It's up to how you want to draw your character and get it all working correctly. So that's pretty much it. We've gone through 2 different ways of assigning a character to an armature. My next video, I'll be exporting this, bring it into Unity, add some script, watch him run around the scene. So that should be fun. If you like this, give it a thumbs up, and please leave a comment whether you enjoyed it, whether you didn't enjoy it, what you'd like to see. Maybe I went too fast and you didn't understand something. I'm always happy to read comments and respond. So thanks for watching again. Give it a thumbs up and keep watching my channel.